All right. Good morning, everybody. Want to have an opportunity to talk about something that I'm sure we've all heard in this audience before numerous times, but I guess it's like safety. It's one of those things that we need to continually talk about, and that's the use of prescribed fire or the reintroduction of fire to older suppressed southern pine stands. And you'll note that I changed the title a little bit from what we typically talk about, which is reintroduction of fire to longleaf pine stands, but to broaden it to southern pine stands as well, since not all of us are dealing necessarily with mature longleaf pine stands. There's a number of folks in the audience that could give this talk as well and have. I don't see them, but Kevin Hires, this is a lot of his work. Morgan Varner, a lot of his work. Nathan Klaus done a lot of work up in Middle Georgia, and again, the most important thing that I want you to recognize or take away from this is that fire is an important element, silvicultural tool in southern pine management. But when we walk into these stands that haven't seen fire for decades and they're mature trees, that it requires special attention. We just can't use fire like we normally use it in, say, a young plantation. So we understand the value of fire in longleaf pine forests. In my mind, it is one of the most important silvicultural tools that we have in our toolbox. And quite frankly, I tell a lot of landowners, if they're planting longleaf pine and fire's not part of their equation, unless they're managing pine straw, but they otherwise don't intend to burn, that maybe they need to be thinking about some of the other southern pine species as well. It is such a valuable tool in management of longleaf. But at the same time, there are 3 other southern pine species out there that we think about. Longleaf being the one that we often talk about with fire, but shortleaf pine, especially where I'm from in Alabama, is a really important tool, or a really important tree that we manage and use fire on. And then slash pine, I don't know if any folks in the audience manage those types of forest cover. And then also loblolly pine to a certain degree, especially when the trees get older. Now, these pictures, like this lower picture is up near Andersonville, the loblolly pine there. The landowner was managing his mature loblolly stands for quail, thinning them out, getting fire underneath them. Slash pine, this would be down in the Big Bend area of Florida, so not too far from here. And then shortleaf pine, that would be in central Alabama. John Stivers, I saw him in the audience. This is one of his properties. But again, the behavior of fires is, there you are, John, is important in the management of a lot of these forest cover types. Of course, we all know the story. Certainly we think of Smokey Bear as being one of the culprits, but it started sooner than that in the Southeast with the Southern Forestry Education Project, American Forest Foundation at the time. And it made sense. We had a lot of the landscape that was cut over. Longleaf was hard to get. It was hard to plant. It was bare root. Survival was really poor, so we looked to some of the other southern pine species to plant. Loblolly in particular, very abundant, easy to plant. So long as you planted it the right direction, it would grow. And even sometimes when you planted it the wrong direction, it would still grow. But it didn't handle fire very well at the early ages. So the idea was just to keep fire out of these stands completely, with the idea that eventually we'd go back and start promoting fire. Well, it may have taken 50, 60, 70 years before that second part of that message finally came about. But it was a very effective messaging campaign. At the time, they had these fleet of international trucks using this new technology called moving pictures, which folks had never seen. A lot of folks had never seen before. So a lot of these evangelical or concepts where they're going to churches, where they're going to supper clubs, where they're going to schools, talking about this message of the ills of fire and how it needed to be kept out of our southern pine forests. And in fact, this is one of Georgia's trucks. The very first trip, it's kind of ironic, the international truck traveled through a hurricane to get to Waycross, Georgia, to deliver this message for the very first time as part of this program. And again, very effective, reached millions of people. This is one of the films, again, moving picture films. This is Burning Bill, which was filmed down in Bainbridge, Georgia. And there's a story that I read one time that they were showing a film, one of these films, and it was showing fire licking the screen. And one of the old timers that was in the audience got up and ran off because he thought that the theater was on fire. So it was just this new technology. And I mean, we have different technology now, and we have the ability that we can retell that message in a different sort of way using new technology. But at that time, it was very effective message getting out. And then technology advanced as well, mechanized attack of fires, not just people out there with flaps or tops from trees putting out the fire. We got very good at putting out fires. And we still are really good at putting out fires, and we need to be. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but we got really good at it. And so, we just saw a change in forest cover from some of those early pictures that I was showing you, not only in longleaf pine, but also shortleaf pine forests and slash pine forests. Loblolly was always a pretty minor component, certainly over in Alabama. Was a minor component until we started planting it, until we started suppressing fire. But, we changed from almost a pure pine-dominated forest to one that was, pine and hardwoods or pine and shrubs, just a very different forest cover type. Just an aside, I said that Waycross was one of those first places that they hit with this message, this branding of fire being, needing to be kept out of these forests. Here's a picture I found from 1933. I don't think anybody in the audience was in this picture, but, maybe. But what do you see in that photo? It's probably longleaf or slash pine or a combination of both down in that part of the world. This is the Okefenokee area. You can actually see on this tree that they're cutting fire scar. So obviously that was a fire-dominated habitat, seeing fire on a very regular basis. Who knows, maybe even every year, maybe every 2 years, probably no more than every 3. But again, we got really good at suppressing fire and kept keeping it out. And ironically, some of the larger wildfires that we've been seeing in the southeast have been in the Okefenokee area, with the Honey Prairie Fire alone being about 300,000 acres. So that was the trade-off, or one of the trade-offs. We maintained forest cover, but the way that fire behaved changed. So now we look around and we can look at these historic photos, and I love looking at these old photos of big trees and open and park-like conditions. And this is in Chimney Peak in Alabama, up near Jacksonville State University. The Roland Harper picture on the left of what this forest looked like in the 1920s, before a lot of this branding of anti-fire message, and then what it looks like today. Oh, I say today, I probably took this about 10 years ago, this picture. But again, the character of the forest has changed dramatically in a lot of areas. And here's one in South Georgia. And that picture on the lower right is probably really pixelated. It's not really important, other than just visualize how much the forest has changed. And again, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's changed tremendously in a lot of these areas where we've kept fire out. That's actually in the lower right is a longleaf pine. In the center of it, we have the needle drape hanging off that shrub component. And it's changed dramatically. This is over near Colquitt, Georgia. And then here's back to Alabama, another picture that I want to show. And this is where I first started hearing about this message of some of the challenges of trying to reintroduce fire back into these forests. On the left is a track owned by Alger Sullivan Lumber Company down near Flomaton. It was called the Hell Freezes Over stand. When they got it, it looked like this. They went and took a picture of it when they first got it, but the manager of the time said, hell would freeze over before I put fire into that forest. And so by the time I heard about it in the late 1990s, the picture looked like on the right. Fire had not been put in for 50, 60 years into that particular longleaf pine stand. And you can actually, if you look closely, if it's not too pixelated, you can actually see a person kind of hiding in there, undoubtedly covered with chiggers and ticks from the lack of burning. So just a tremendous change in a short period of time of that forest. Aerially, this is what it looked like on the left, seeing regular fire. And you can, if you are familiar with aerial photos, can see that's a fairly open and park-like stand, as you saw in the previous picture, and then what it looked like in the late 1990s on the right. But what's interesting, and again, I don't know if you can see it on the screen or not, but this little corner right here, so this would have been 1990, and this would have been about 2000, I think, when this picture was taken. There was a house right here, and as we do in Alabama, we burn our garbage out in our yards. The fire got away from that pile and slowly crept into these woods. And when I say slow, I meant the volunteer fire department went out there, and the fire was just largely smoldering, not doing much. Maybe somebody had a church supper that night or something, and they just said, we'll come back and deal with it later. So it wasn't this huge conflagration where, fire was moving from treetop to treetop to treetop. It was a very slow-moving, creeping, smoldering fire. And everybody thought, well, hey, this is actually a good thing for this stand. We kind of heard it earlier with the fire on one of the barrier islands in Georgia. Maybe that's not a bad thing. Well, I think what we need to look out for, and it might be the case of what we saw at Flomaton, and about 2 years later, the majority of that stand was dead. So again, just another picture. This is close to being a photo point. That's Tom Croker right there, who was one of the early pioneers in longleaf pine research. In that Hell Freezes Over stand, you could see that probably 10 years post-fire exclusion, the dynamics of the forest is starting to change, and the picture to the right is almost the exact vantage point in the late 1990s. So the forest had changed tremendously during that period of time. But what that fire was doing, again, this is true whether it's longleaf pine, and I've seen it in loblolly pine, and I've seen it in shortleaf pine as well, where we have that heavy accumulation of fuel around those trees, is it doesn't have to be a blistering fire that's moving from treetop to treetop. It can be these slow-moving fires, these smoldering fires that are pretty sinister as well, that are causing a lot of this damage. And what it looks like, you may see it the day of the burn. It may look like that, and this is one of Morgan Varner's photos from his research. Or you may come out 2 weeks later and see this, where it's burned out the base of those trees, something like that as well. Where it just smolders and it takes out all of that organic material around the base of those trees. And the end result is usually not good. And this is Flomaton again, so these pictures are quite old, but just to give you an idea, that's what that stand looked like 2 years later with that garbage fire that just kind of skunked into that area. And, first it looked like this with these trees flagging. And you could hear that clicking of the beetles, southern pine beetles, or even black turpentine beetles in those stands. And you knew that things were bad. And then the majority of that died. So I apologize. This is an old presentation, so I apologize for the animation in the PowerPoint, but bear with me. As far as Flomaton was concerned, only longleaf pine suffered mortality. And there were no longleaf pine that were greater than 18-inch DBH that survived that fire. So again, very low intensity fire, took out most of the trees. including one that was greater than 360 years old. So that's a resource that we want to keep around in a lot of cases in ecosystem restoration. But, just this very low intensity fire was very sinister in killing most of that stand. Since then, we've seen it in a lot of areas. This is, I think, possibly one of Kevin Heyer's photo, the Patterson Tract out at Eglin Air Force Base. Great habitat now for red-headed woodpeckers, but not a good one for red-cockaded woodpeckers. This is the Boyd Tract in the lower right. North Carolina, same sort of thing. A lot of dead, old longleaf from the attempts to get fire reintroduced into these old stands. And again, I just want to say that I've seen these as well in loblolly stands and some of our other southern pines as well. And it's these older trees that haven't seen fire in a while. This is some of my work, not so proud of, but, I just want to let you know that it happens. These are just some dead trees that I've killed through time trying to reintroduce fire into some of these stands. But so I guess, this is a talk that I've been given for a while, and Hires has probably given it a number of times. Nathan's probably given it a number of times. And I guess it's just something that we need to just keep pounding away at, because there's a new generation. There's some younger folks in the crowd. Maybe this is a new message to you. So I guess my point is pay attention to these situations. Just to tell you, and every generation thinks that this is a new discovery. Well, it's not. It's not a new discovery. On the far right, that's a paper I wrote in 2005, which doesn't seem like that was that long ago, but actually it was. This is, and I had first heard about it from Dr. Cush in his 1999 paper. I was like, oh, well, this is a new phenomenon. And so I wrote about it in 2005. There's been papers since then. But then there's this paper from 1960 talking about cool burns and pine mortality and loblolly pine. And same sort of situation where the stand hadn't seen fire in a long time and had a cool, smoldering fire come into that loblolly stand and took the whole thing out. So we've known about this a long time. So I don't think the message is new. I think we really need to push our research into how we deal with it a little bit better. We've been trying to use reintroduction of fire to do this, but there may be other tools out there that are just as good that we need to investigate better, raking being one and mulching being another one. Aside from our southern pines, we're also seeing this in a range of other pines across the country, ponderosa pine in particular, which is this lower picture. They're seeing that sort of phenomenon. Now, I will say that it's pretty standard practice in places like the Blue Mountains of Oregon, where they're reintroducing fire into ponderosa pine, that they're raking around all of their trees. And I'll talk about raking here in just a little bit. But again, not necessarily a new message, but I think it's an important one that we need to keep putting out there. So a lot of doom and gloom. If you use fire wrong, you're going to kill a lot of your stand. So why do it? Why attempt to restore stands that haven't seen fire in a long time, whether it be loblolly, whether it be slash, whether it be longleaf, shortleaf, whatever. I think we all have but that's one of the biggest reasons is, keep those old trees around, and some of them are relics. Again, a 350-year-old tree is that's a relic, one to keep around, in my opinion. So ecosystem restoration, avoiding that time lag, and of course fuel reduction for wildfire abatement. So again, the issue doesn't matter what tree southern pine species it is. The issue is in the ground. That's where we need to take our focus. Try to take your focus away from that mid-story component, saying that's going to be my primary goal, is to reduce the mid-story shrub component. The goal needs to be shifted to, let me focus on the ground, those fine roots, very fine roots, some of the coarse roots that are growing into this organic duff material. This is one of Varner's pictures where we're seeing this accumulation of duff and organic material around the base of these trees. Again, you see it on all the southern pine species. It's a little more pronounced in longleaf because they're bigger needles, but and it looks like this. And we've all seen it, I'm sure. If not, train your eye to see it. And that's that buildup of material around the trees. When it gets really bad, I've been on some of the slopes up on Horn Mountain in Talladega where you can bounce up and down on this stuff. It's so thick. It warrants special attention in your burn prescription. This is what it should look like. That's about 1 inch of material, mostly pine straw, but bits of pine cone or pine cones and flecks of bark as well. That's typically what we're seeing on about a 3-year rotation or less. But, it changes through time. Now we're up at about 9 inches or greater in some cases of organic material. And of course, as we've always talked about in these talks, is that organic material is a great bed for the fine roots to spread out in. When we burn it, it looks like something like this. This is Joe O'Brien's work and some of Hire's work. Is that smoldering, that residence time around these areas. 110 minutes post-ignition is the bottom picture. So just focus on that. Red is bad. You don't want to have that smoldering around those trees. And this is just some of this mortality. Again, it's a delayed mortality. And there's not the data on loblolly or slash, but I'm seeing it the same. It's a delayed mortality, whereas the first year things are like, hey, this was a great thing for the stand. And then year 2 is when you start seeing a lot of delayed mortality on these trees. The flagging, the sounds of the southern pine beetles, the black turpentine beetles, etc. And again, this is some of the data. It's mostly our bigger trees, our older trees who are seeing this. And when I say older, I mean not necessarily economically mature, but biologically mature trees, or 50-year-old pine trees or 60-plus-year-old pine trees. So the lessons that can be learned is that we can kill longleaf. Let me change that, strike that, say we can kill longleaf, but we can also kill our other southern pine species with fire in these fire-suppressed stands, and it's related to forest floor consumption. We take out too much of that forest floor at once with our burn. The temperatures are sufficient to both girdle the trees and kill the roots, and it may be delayed, but the end result is the same, dead trees and a salvage logging operation if you can get it. Just another picture. This is some work that I did in Alabama in the early 2000s. This is what it looks like. Again, we've all seen it. This is a mixture of shortleaf and longleaf together. And I don't know why I had it there, but it was obviously out of place. But here's some of the tools that can be used as we're moving into these older stands. Again, the first one is we have to recognize that there's an issue, and it's got to be treated differently. The prescription's got to be treated differently. It's important to go into these stands. Like, you wouldn't want to go in right now. I don't know when your last rain in South Georgia was, but in Alabama it was about 2 weeks ago. I wouldn't want to go into one of these stands right now and try to get fire into it. It's just too dry. It would smolder too easily. If you can get in there as quickly as you can after a rain, that's ideal. I know, Nathan wrote something for the longleaf leader about use of a moisture meter. Back in the day, we weren't that sophisticated. We just kind of stuck our hand down in there and said, yeah, it just feels right. It still feels kind of damp down there. But he's got some pretty interesting data on that. I would recommend looking at it. But, greater than 75% was the number that he had, using this moisture meter around the base of these trees to make sure that they're damp enough so that when that fire goes through, it's just peeling off one top of it. My team has moved a lot to these FLIR cameras that we have on our cell phones, which works really good for mop-up. You're going to have smoldering trees, even under the best situation. And what we do is we'll go in with these FLIR cameras and look for hot spots. And you're going to be using a lot of water. Now, this is just kind of a funny picture of, this is the Flomaton area when it was still around back in the late 90s, trying to put these trees out with a backpack pump. A very futile exercise. You're going to need more water than that. I always have a Type 6 engine or Type 7 engine where I've got a good bit of water, and then ATVs, UTVs, where we're shuttling water back and forth to put these out. Now, I will say that there are situations where this may take place over several days. We had a stand down along near Panacea a couple of years ago where it was smoldering for 6 days. So we had to keep going out and putting fire onto these hot spots. But you could spot them. I mean, you can sort of see it with a little wisp of smoke, but these FLIR cameras are really good and really not that expensive to have either. The day that you choose is important. And again, right after rain is a great opportunity to get fire into these. As you can kind of see from this picture, stable atmospheric conditions. This was a part in Alabama where we could get away with something like this. You may not always be able to get away with atmospheric conditions like this because of smoke, but it was a very conservative day. A couple of days after rain, tried to keep the fire intensity as low as possible, and just allow those to pull through. So again, you can see the date on that is 2005. So this is not groundbreaking new stuff here. We've known about this for a while, but I think there's definitely a connection between smoldering and any sort of additional damage that you cause to the tree, like scorching is in particular. So you don't want to get it so hot that you not only scorch the trees, but also consume all that organic duff around them. But this is just kind of an example of a typical prescription that I may use in a stand like this. Just some more pictures. Again, 2003. So a while ago, gosh, almost 20 years ago. But this is before. Note some of the larger woody debris on the left-hand side, just to kind of give you an idea of not only the firing technique, but the moisture conditions. So it's all that heavy stuff still there after a fire, but we're just kind of peeling off a layer at a time. And this is going to take many, many years to try to get this fire back in. Another example, you can see the only thing that was consumed was a pine cone, maybe. And you got to watch those pine cones too, because they'll reignite some of this too. All right. And just some more photos of trying to get fire in. Again, my job trying to get fire in is, the first burn, I know I may not get 100% consumption of the ground layer, and I don't want to. It's very conservative conditions that we're burning under. And this one's important. Look at all that needle drape in there. But I've got a firing technique, maybe just by luck, that didn't involve any of that mid-story fuel, but a very fast-moving fire that just kind of skimmed that first layer off. And again, this is no, that's not a loblolly stand, but that's a longleaf stand. Okay, so what about raking? I don't think that there's been a definitive study. I mean, there's been some studies, but I don't think we're to the point where I say, yeah, let's do raking 100% of the time. I just don't know. Maybe we are there. Berry College, Martin Cipollini up there, they raked around a lot of their trees, and this is his quote, never saw any negative effects of raking. Nathan, I think, you saw no mortality or decline from raking. But Eglin, they did a study out there where they did some deep raking down to mineral soil. And in a year, they had a lot of girdled trees, a lot of dead trees. So, I mean, that caused me to pause a little bit. And then down at Ordway, they did light raking, and they saw no mortality after 4 years. Again, this is a pretty common practice out on Ponderosa pine. And maybe it's a great practice for addressing these stands before we get fire into them. I just don't know at this point, and I can't stand up here and say, yeah, use it. I think we need a little bit more data. Classic scientist answer, I guess. More data. Mulching, and I fall prey to this all the time too. We want to see changes within our career span. In some of these stands, to get fire in may take 10, 15, 20 years, and we get impatient. And I'm just as guilty as anybody. So I'm like, all right, well, let me just pay somebody to come in and mulch this. So a fire suppressed stand, and we get in there and we mulch it. I think if you're gonna, and again, there's not a whole lot of data out there on what the effect may be. Just empirically, if you're gonna mulch it, I would say get in there as quickly as you can after you mulched it to get fire in there. Because if you wait too long, all those little bits of mulch material can become involved in the fire, and you're going to be dealing with smoldering fire for days, if not weeks. And then you're also going to have every bit of brush or whatever that you mulch is going to come back with a vengeance. We have sweet gum in Alabama, which I think thrives on being mulched. So you're going to have to go in and possibly use an herbicide at some point as well, possibly. This was a site down in Florida where we mulched. You can see, what the base of that longleaf looked like because it wasn't being burned, and all that bark accumulating around the side of it. And again, because we mulched it, we were out there for several days mopping up. I don't even remember how much water we used. Probably 1,000 gallons. I don't know. It was a lot. Putting out the mopping that out, and we still lost trees because of it. So, mulching, I get it. We want to see changes in our career span, but just be wary of it as well as it adding extra fuel to that. And again, that could be slash pine, and we'd have some of the same issues. Some of the things to watch out for on longleaf and slash pine are some of these cultural relics where we've taken off the protective bark. They become, I see this in a lot of reintroduction fires. Getting fire back into these can cause a lot of challenges. California makes money off of people driving through trees like this. In the southeast, that's a dead tree standing. But the point is it can be done. Just reintroducing fire can be done. There's going to be trade-offs with it. There's going to be benefits. Again, that tree up on the upper left-hand side, that's a 400-year-old tree. You can't replicate that in any sort of rapid succession, but you can get fire in. You just got to be careful doing it. Again, up on Lavender Mountain, I think they've been successful with it. I know up on Pine Mountain, to a certain extent, they've been successful with it, and there's going to be trade-offs. I don't have any of the other numbers. I know that Cipollini saw about 15% mortality on their old trees, so maybe that's a great trade-off. The stand certainly looks good now. One thing that places like Lavender Mountain and any other place that we manage, we need to consider is we're only one land manager away from apathy, meaning the next person that comes in says, well, I know Cipollini was really aggressive to get fire back into this stand, but the new manager may say, well, not my priority. And then we quickly lose all that ground that we gained. And I've seen that on properties that I managed when I was managing some property for Auburn University. Was looking really great 20 years ago, walked away, and the new land manager, it wasn't his priority. So now we're trying to dig back out all the gains that we had made. Here's one at the Jones Center. When I first came there in July of 1995, this was what they called the Turkey Woods. This is what it looked like. And, for somebody that didn't grow up in South Georgia at the time, I was like, oh, that was a good-looking woods. I know now that wasn't the end game, and through just a really aggressive fire program done by experts like Mark Melvin and Robert Smith and others, they really got that stand through carefully metered fire to look more appropriately like a longleaf wiregrass stand. And I suspect that's what it looks like today, although this picture is several years old. So it can be done. Just be careful, be cautious, and know that it's not just longleaf, it's all of our other southern pines that we're seeing this on as well. We just happen to have most of our data for longleaf pine. So I'm about 5 minutes over, so I'm not going to go over that. But if I have time for a few questions, unless I get pulled off the stage, I'll happily answer them, and I'll just kind of leave that up there with some of my thoughts. So no questions that I'm seeing.
I got one.
Okay.
It's sort of made your presentation.
All right.
Try and find those old Dixie Crusade films, like Burning Bills.
Yeah.
And I have struck out, I don't know how many times. Do you have any tips or suggestions as to where I could access that?
No, sir, I do not. And like you, I've tried to do that search myself, as has one of my colleagues. Part of the problem is they were putting that film on a media that didn't preserve well. And so I think a lot of them just degraded, unfortunately, because it would have been great information. But I've been to National Archives. I've been to the Forest History Society. I think Zach even talked to the grandson of one of the original guys that did the film, and they just unfortunately don't exist. I think Dixie Crusaders made 5 films, but they were also using a lot of other films that were provided by the state at the time as well. So there's a number of them, but I just unfortunately haven't seen them. There's a few cool old ones around on the internet that you can see, but they're not those anti-fire or those fire suppression films that you're talking about. I wish I could find them, but I just don't. I'm afraid they're just not there. The pictures are, but not the films.